In its latest biannual survey of Korea's economy, the OECD shed grave light on the country's aging population as well as its high youth unemployment, claiming that ultimately these challenges look to curb national growth. So how rapidly is Korea aging? And why is Korea's youth unemployment so high? What can be done to address these challenges? Welcome to Tuesday's edition of Issues and Insiders. I'm Min Sunhee. Today we address the reality of an aging population amid a high youth unemployment rate here in the National Front and possible solutions. For more, I have Kwon Soa here in the studio. Soa, welcome back.
Hello, Sunny.
I also have Matthew WEIGAND with us. Matthew, it's a pleasure to have you here.
Yeah, me as well.
Right. So let's start with you then. Let's begin with a few words on the OECD's findings with regard to Korea's silver society.
Well, while noting some very surprisingly positive findings, such as Korea having been less impacted during the COVID-19 pandemic compared to other OECD nations, the organization's Economic Survey of Korea highlighted a number of concerning prospects, including the fact that Korea is the fastest population aging among the OECD. In fact, this year, the number of senior citizens refers to those aged 65 and above. This number stands at above 9 million now here. So as of now, Korea is estimated to become a super-aged society in 2025, and that means it would take just 7 years for Korea to become such from an aged society. So just to give a quick definition here, a country where over 7% of the population are senior citizens, this is referred to as an aging society according to the WHO. If the proportion reaches 14%, the country is considered an aged society, and at 20%, it's a super-aged society. And the OECD report also assesses Korea falls short of preparing for an aging society or super-aged society while it's happening this fast.
Right, I see. And Matthew, how does Korea's reality compare to that of the US? I mean, is the US also noting an expansion in its elderly population? And if so, what have been some of the implications of that reality?
Yes, actually, the U.S. is seeing the same demographic shifts. Based on SOA's definitions, the U.S. is also currently an aged society where 17% of U.S. citizens are age 65 or older. And the predictions are that by 2030, that the number will reach 21%. So that would qualify the U.S. for a super aged society as well. So, and further beyond that, they're saying that by maybe in 15 years or so, older Americans are expected to outnumber children. So this is not something that is just isolated to South Korea or isolated to Asia, but is something that's being seen in a lot of the developed world. So of course there are the basic worry is that the aging population, because they are entitled to certain care and they require more resources to support, there are worries that while that segment of the population increases and also the segment of the working and tax-paying population decreases, that they will become more of a burden on the tax-paying population while the tax-paying population is also decreasing. So people are worried that there's going to be a lack of jobs, a lack of workers, and that would create some inflationary pressures.
Right, and staying with the repercussions mentioned by Matthew Soa, what have been some of those ramifications of an aging population here in South Korea?
Well, although the aging society is partly the result of people living longer, which is good for itself, but we're also seeing record low birth rates. So this trend has naturally led to more elderly people having to work, or rather people having to work longer after retirement. But it's not easy to get a well-paying job as a senior, and thus poverty among elderly has increased as well. In many cases, senior citizens' labor barely keeps them away from poverty. And this is what the OECD in its report on South Korea's economy emphasizes. In a figure titled Old Age Poverty is High, data shows the elderly poverty rate, which is the proportion of elderly earning less than 50% of the median income. That stands at around 40%. So apart from low-paying jobs, insufficient coverage of pension, insufficient private savings are also attributed to senior poverty in Korea. And this, unfortunately, also is linked to Korea's seniors facing the highest risk of committing suicide among the OECD.
Right, I see. And against this grim backdrop, Matthew, could you tell us a bit about perhaps the efforts that in the US to better address this social phenomenon of an aging population? And do you believe some of those measures perhaps could be implemented here in South Korea?
Well, after looking into this issue in the US, it seems to be something that's been looked at the state level rather than at the federal level. It seems to be each individual state is taking care of things in their own way. Some states have made some measures in thinking about this issue or preparing for this issue. Like, for instance, California, they have managed to create a framework called the Master Plan for Aging. And they have identified some goals that they would like to work towards, which is, making sure that older people have health care, and they have housing, and they have, all the things that they need to survive. And also they've made a list of criteria that they use to measure how close they are to these goals. But that's just the very beginning step. They have goals and they have a way to measure how they're going to those goals, but they have not yet reached the point where they have implemented policies in order to help reach those goals. They're just barely at the planning stage. Texas as well, they've created a review committee that's been thinking about what's going to happen when this happens, when the number of retired people age 65 or older are more than 20% of the population. And this committee has started reviewing policies and making recommendations, but they have yet to get to the point where actually new policies have been implemented. It seems like the state in the US that has gone the furthest so far is Colorado, from what I could find, in that Colorado is saying that there needs to be very concrete policies implemented. Like, for instance, they would like to increase the retirement savings of its citizens by implementing policies to get them to, take more of their paycheck and put it aside for the future.
To save up.
Yeah, but from what I could find and everything that I've read, it seems like individual states are taking care of this, and they are still at the policy stage and not really implementing specific action plans to do much yet.
Right, I see. Beyond Korea's elderly, so the OECD also pointed to the country's high youth unemployment. How severe is this situation, and how is the OECD appearing to assess it?
Right. At first glance, South Korea's unemployment figure actually does not appear to be tremendously concerning. It's in fact at around the 2% level, so pretty stable. But Korea's youth employment rate stands below the OECD average. I think it was at the 40% level. And even the employment rate among college graduates is among the lowest. We here in Korea are well aware of the society pushing Korean youth towards intense competition to get into top universities and also high-paying jobs. So there's that image of young people setting immensely high standards to get into major conglomerates, for instance, and not wanting to go through hardships, as some might say. But the deputy head of the OECD Economics Department, Vincent Cohen, says that's not how he and the OECD sees it. It's the chronic problem of dualism in Korea's economy and job market. So the OECD says low youth employment is caused by a mismatch between education and the labor market. So on the one side, you've got highly educated young people who are striving for the so-called spec, what we call here in Korea specifications or credentials to secure high-paying quality jobs, while on the other hand, you've got senior workers retiring from jobs that ask for less human capital. And then there's also more dualism between regular and non-regular workers, between conglomerates or big companies and small and medium firms, small SMEs, right? So Cohen points out the wage gap between large companies and SMEs and the productivity gap behind the wage gap. So it's really natural that you've got high productivity from high wage. However, this gap itself is just abnormally high in Korea.
Right, I see. And for the sake of comparison, Matthew, where does the US stand in terms of youth unemployment?
Well, in the youth unemployment levels, you could see that they really spiked at the beginning of the COVID pandemic back in 2020. So there was a little concern about that. There was a lot of concern about that. But over the last 2 years, the youth unemployment levels have gone back down to where they generally were before the pandemic. So in the US, youth unemployment can be said to be around 8%, which is higher than what it is for the entire country. But it doesn't seem to be as bad as it is in Korea.
Right.
But also, it doesn't seem to be like there's much of a policy towards addressing youth unemployment at the state or the federal level in the U.S. I think the U.S. just seems to want that to be taken care of by the free market. You know, whatever job you can get it, and there's not really much of a program or anything to help young people get jobs or get better paying jobs in the U.S.
Right, fortunately, because it's not as severe as it is here in South Korea then. And so that being said, what can you share with us about the recommendations made by the OECD to better tackle our youth unemployment, as well as, of course, our aging society?
Well, I mentioned the problem of dualism, right? So what the OECD suggests is to break down a labor market dualism, and how to do that through relaxing employment protection for regular workers, as findings point out that those aged 15 to 29, more than 40% of employed people are non-regular workers. Also, breaking down product market dualism by expanding public support for SMEs is also being recommended. And a very difficult issue is brought up too is the advice to reform the nation's education system in a way to allow students to more room to develop their talents and their interests by putting less emphasis into the college entrance exam. In regards to the aging society, the OECD suggests a change to the public pension healthcare system. I guess that's similar to the US, and also to raise the number of student admissions to medical schools, because the report does mention that South Korea has established one of the best healthcare systems in a short amount of time, but currently this system cannot deal the fast aging society. So the challenge is to raise pension levels and pension finances at the same time, and more specifically increasing the national pension service contribution rates and also extending the contribution period beyond the age of 60.
Right, I see. And Matthew, as a foreign journalist looking into the problems faced by Koreans, what do you propose to better address Korea's youth unemployment and perhaps even to better accommodate its aging population?
Well, I think that one thing that could address both problems at the same time would be to get more youth into healthcare related jobs, because there seems to be a need for more healthcare related jobs in the future to take care of the aging society, and more young people need jobs. So if there could be more programs to quickly train more nurses or lab technicians or all of the many different jobs related in healthcare, then that might be an avenue for more youth to get jobs. Another thing that could be a piece of advice that could be followed would be to have already done really well in the COVID-19 pandemic, which is something that has happened actually. Korea has had one of the best responses to and recoveries from the COVID-19 pandemic. So at this post-COVID era, according to Joe Biden, he officially announced the pandemic to be over recently. Korea could emerge as a leader actually in this field of what to do with these issues, both the aging population and the youth unemployment issues. So instead of, this could be an opportunity for Korea to, instead of looking abroad to trying to find some solution to these innovative issues that they are dealing with, Korea could become a dispenser of advice to other countries. You can solve the problem here, and then you can show other people other countries how best to deal with these problems.
Right, that is one recommendation then. So we have a bit more time. On a scale of 0 to 10, I understand that the OECD found that Korea rated below the OECD average with regard to life satisfaction. I believe the country ranked 5.8 and the OECD average is 6.7. Personally, what do you suppose should be done to boost the general sense of satisfaction among Koreans?
I think maybe the hint is inside the index, life satisfaction. For some years, the trend here is to pursue a work-life balance. So a better balance of that might lead to a higher number in the future.
I see. All right. So, and on that note, then we'll end. Thank you very much for your time and your thoughts. And Matthew, thank you very much for your insights today.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Thank you.